On the 15th of March, at the footsteps of Harambee House, President Uhuru Kenyatta addressed the nation for the first time after it became apparent that Kenya recorded its first positive coronavirus case. In his address to the nation, President Kenyatta revealed that in an attempt to stem the spread of the virus, the tough decision to close schools indefinitely for 30 days was made. On Monday, however, Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha was quick to deny claims that a decision had been made on the future of learners this academic year, and in particular, this year's candidates.
So I don't understand what all this hue and cry is about.
During the daily coronavirus briefings at Harambee House, a combative Magoha said that though the ministry has anticipated several eventualities, things at the moment remain as is in the academic calendar.
We have already worked in the back room, and we have certain scenarios which I shall not divulge to you at this time. If and when the time comes, we shall tell you whether issues like exams will still be held. As at now, I, as the head of the sector, do not see any reason why we should postpone exams.
We should allow government to look at how the education sector will be affected, because in the context of our very, very fragile healthcare system, we are looking at how to utilize the education infrastructure in the country to serve as a backup to our fragile and nimble healthcare system. So one has to appreciate that education will be one of the last spaces that will be opened for normal use after the situation will have normalized.
Amos Kaburu, an education expert, says that though learners and even their parents remain apprehensive on what the future holds, the coming weeks will determine the course of the academic calendar.
We have to appreciate that COVID-19 is synonymous with a war. And therefore, in the context of war, the first thing that you have to be doing is to invest in what you call humanitarian assistance. I think we are suffering because of our very, very rigid kind of structuring our education, how we have designed education, especially things such as exams. Why should we imagine that exams should be happening at a particular time? Why don't we start thinking of education from the way healthcare looks at testing and measurement? Why should we have to wait for children to stay up to 8 years in school, or maybe for another 4 years for us to be able to tell that they have mastered certain competencies or not? So we should be looking at how to liberalize our assessment systems, how to make sure that we can assess and measure children's abilities at any given time.
After schools were closed indefinitely, the government quickly seemed to provide an alternative to learning in classrooms, championing for e-learning. This has however been marred by challenges, including limited access to the internet for most vulnerable families, no access to even a TV set or even a radio.
And so I think COVID is taking us to the drawing board as educators and as education planners, to sit down and ask ourselves, how can we design an education system that is more resilient to this kind of shocks that will be happening? Technology offers opportunities, but this may not be optimal in our context because of the nature of how technology, first of all, it's packaged, the cost of that technology, which in the process ends up to excavate inequalities as opposed to solving those inequalities.
Kaburu is calling for a total review of the country's curriculum and the setup of contingency plans that will cushion learners from such eventualities.
We are not going to risk the lives of our children because dead people do not take exams. So the parents should should remain calm.
Education is controlled by government, so they have the ability to control the education calendar. There's nothing cast on stone that a school term should be starting in January. Something can still happen, and exams can still be administered in February, and children are still be able to be admitted in school in March next year. Let's right now concentrate on saving lives.
For candidates, meanwhile, it's wait and see on what their fate will be. The panic that has currently gripped the education sector has been termed as totally unacceptable. The challenges that we're currently facing, however, calls for deeper conversations into what the education sector has been set out to be. This is a discussion that will no doubt be had in the coming days. Shukriwachu, K24, Nairobi.